Hungry, scared, vulnerable. More than 50,000 children, some barely school age, are showing up on America's southern doorstep. This has caused a humanitarian crisis and a political challenge for President Obama. Find out why next on The Line. This is On The Line, and I'm Aisha Tanzim. The number of children crossing the U.S. border from Mexico has surged so dramatically it has turned into a humanitarian crisis. It has also brought the battle over immigration reform to the forefront of Washington politics. VOA congressional correspondent Cindy Sain explains.
So far this year, 52,000 unaccompanied children, mostly from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, have made the long journey across Mexico to cross the border into the United States. U.S. Border Patrol agents detain most of them and eventually place some of them with a relative or a foster family in the U.S. The chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Republican Michael McCaul, says the Obama administration should have seen this coming.
The tragic fact is these children are making a dangerous journey based on misinformation and the false promise of amnesty.
McCall, from Texas, says border states like his are completely overwhelmed by the influx of children, and he is calling on the president to take action.
States should not need to protect what is in the federal government's role under our Constitution.
The White House rejected putting guard troops on the border after announcing last week the federal government would open additional detention centers. And Democrats rejected blame, saying Central American children are also seeking refuge in other countries.
It is irresponsible to attribute this crisis to one U.S. policy, or for that matter, one U.S. president.
Many of the children who come across alone are eventually released to the custody of relatives with instructions pending court appearances. Some are deported. Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson calls it a humanitarian crisis.
We're talking about large numbers of children without their parents who have arrived at our border hungry, thirsty, exhausted, scared, and vulnerable. How we treat the children, in particular, is a reflection of our laws and our values.
But some Republican lawmakers are frustrated, saying they have been calling for more fences and tougher security along the border.
I've been there. I know what I'm talking about. And we don't have a fence down there, and if we did, we wouldn't have 5-year-old children coming across.
Secretary Johnson explained that U.S. law has special provisions for unaccompanied minors.
The law that was created in 2008 requires that we turn these kids over, if they're unaccompanied, to the Department of Health and Human Services within 72 hours generally.
Johnson said the U.S. is working to get the message out to parents in Central America that their children face unacceptable risks coming to the United States and that there are no immigration permits waiting for them. Cindy Sain, VOA News on Capitol Hill.
President Barack Obama has requested $2 billion from Congress to ease this crisis. In the meantime, he has already announced some immediate measures.
As a first step, I'm directing the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Attorney General to move available and appropriate resources from our interior to the border. Protecting public safety and deporting dangerous criminals has been and will remain the top priority, but we are going to refocus our efforts where we can to make sure we do what it takes to keep our border secure.
Two guests are joining me to talk about this issue. Chris Shemelensky is in studio with me. He's the Director of Content and Activism at Numbers USA. And Rajiv Khanna is joining us via Skype from Arlington, Virginia. He is an immigration lawyer with 30 years of experience. Welcome to On the Line. Let me start with you, Mr. Shemelensky. Why is this happening?
Well, I think certainly you can point towards the conditions that are taking place in Central America with the drug cartels and the governments down there, their inability to control what's going on in their countries. But at the same time, I do think that the United States, including the Obama administration, has sent a clear message, not so much in words, but in actions, that if you can come to the country and get across our borders, we will allow you to stay. It's not, yes, they are getting notices to appear. They are going to have to go before immigration judges. But 87% of the unaccompanied minors that came across our border last year still have not gone before a judge. So they've been in the country for a year, and that's the message. That's the sort of message that's getting back to their home countries.
Mr. Khanna, you're an immigration lawyer. You know how the system works. Do you think the U.S. is sending out a message into the world, come in, you'll be able to stay?
I think the message has been distorted and misunderstood, but message that acts as a pull is not the only factor. Chris has stated it fairly, that it is one of the factors or possibly one of the factors. But let's look at the overall picture of these three countries that we are talking about. The surrounding 5 countries of the northern triangle of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, the 5 countries surrounding it, Mexico, Panama, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Belize, have experienced 712% combined increase in the number of asylum applications from these 3 countries. So USA, since 2008, USA is not the only country that has been singled out as a pull country. The problem is more of a push. People are being pushed out of their homes for a number of reasons. Those are domestic reasons, a failure to...
Some are saying drug violence is increasing, poverty is increasing. So, Mr. Chemerinsky, if it's a humanitarian crisis, first of all, please tell me if you agree with Mr. Khanna, but then also add, if it's a humanitarian crisis and if U.S. is not the only one facing it, if other countries in the region are also facing it, then how do we treat it as a humanitarian crisis?
Well, I think, and you saw it a little bit in the news package that you ran earlier, some of the images that are coming back from the border are showing the mothers with their small children, but that only tells part of the story. Last week, the House Judiciary Committee held a hearing where they had DHS enforcement officials there, and some of the Border Patrol folks said that when we use the term unaccompanied children, we're talking about anybody up to the age of 17, and the majority are males over the age of 14, between 14 and 17. So a lot of them are coming here just to work because they know that we're going to allow them to stay and they can work illegally because we're not really enforcing our employment laws in this country. So, but having said that, yes, there are some mothers with small children and small children coming by themselves to the United States, and we need to handle that with care. But again, it goes back to the message that we've sent, and I don't think it's been necessarily a vocal message. It has been a message of actions that, yes, there are other receiving countries that these children from those 3 core countries are going to, but word is getting back that if you can make it to the United States, you can stay. And that's the word that we need to change.
But if there's poverty there and other factors that are pushing these children or these mothers with children out, they're going to go somewhere. Of course, U.S. is a good destination, but if they come to U.S. because there's push from behind, what can or should the U.S. do? Well,
there's 12 million children who live in those 3 countries combined. So can the U.S. take all of them in? I don't think that's a viable solution. So I think the best thing for us to do is to work with the governments of those 3 countries and say, what can we do? What sort of assistance can the United States provide to get the drug cartels in those countries under control? Try to curb some of the violence that's down there. So instead of there being a push factor, people want to stay in those countries. Right now, the economy's bad. There's violence. Certainly, I'm not going to debate those facts. But there is something in those countries that are creating an environment where people want to leave. And I think we should try to help those countries create an environment where people want to stay there.
Okay, Mr. Khanna, explain how the law works right now. We heard earlier in that news package that we ran that within 72 hours of minors arriving at the U.S. borders, even illegally, they need to be handed over to the Health and Human Services. Can you expand on that and tell us exactly what happens?
I think it's important to understand that no matter how secure the borders are, if somebody shows up at the border and says, I need asylum because I have this fear of my life, and we can get into the finer details, what kind of fear. But once they exhibit some sort of a fear, we have no choice but to let them in and to produce them eventually before an immigration court. You're right. They are first health screened, and then they're handed over to ORR, the office within the Health and Human Services responsible for resettling them. But the laws of the United States are such, and I agree with Chris. I think no reasonable person can disagree with Chris that we cannot accommodate 12 million people, 12 million young souls. But at the same time, this crisis is immediate. It's urgent. It's something we've got to do right away. In doing something right away, if we think we can turn people away, we are incorrect, because we are exhorting President of the United States to break the same laws that we blame him of breaking. The law currently is, if you show up at my border, I've got to let you in. If you've got a colorable claim to asylum, I've got to produce you before an immigration judge. That is the law.
I want to continue talking about this, but we need to take a short break here. We'll be right back.
World Cup non-stop, voafootball.com.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages, all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
Welcome back to On the Line. I'm Aisha Tanzeen. We're talking about the massive number of unaccompanied children crossing the U.S. border illegally from Mexico. Our guests are Chris Shemilensky of Numbers USA and immigration lawyer Rajiv Khanna. Mr. Shemilensky, earlier we were talking about the law that the president has to uphold and all the police and law enforcement has to uphold. Do you think that the law needs to change rather than putting pressure on the government and saying you're sending the wrong message?
Well, I think we have to do both. And we absolutely need to figure out a way to have more resources. One of the reasons why the unaccompanied minors that come to the United States are here for such a long time, and that message back home is that if you go to the U.S., you can stay, is because we don't have enough immigration judges down on the border right now. So it's taking 1 to 3 years before they can get before a judge.
So do you think the announcement from the president that he's telling everybody send more resources to the border from the internal of the country, and he's asked for $2 billion more from Congress, do you think that's going to solve the problem?
It can help, but now what you're doing is you're taking all of... Now, they come through Border Patrol, but it's Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement that handles the processing and the removal should they be removed. Now, they're a much smaller force than the Border Patrol is, and we only have so many immigration control enforcement agents spread out throughout the United States. And what we're doing, if we're moving them away from the interior down to the border, then we're no longer enforcing our immigration laws in the interior.
In the interior.
So because we don't have the necessary resources, it's somewhere it's going to hurt us.
Okay, let's move on to the bigger picture, which is immigration reform in U.S. Some people say, Mr. Khanna, that if immigration reform had happened, a comprehensive immigration reform bill, that this problem would not have gotten so bad. Do you agree?
I think so. There is a I forget the exact figure, but it's about $32 billion increase in the funding for DHS for extra border patrols. That would have helped. For extra immigration judges, like Chris pointed out, that would have helped. So if the comprehensive immigration law had been passed, we would have a much more cogent, concrete, cohesive body of laws that can then be presented to these folks who are being misled.
Okay, so Mr. Shemilensky, What is standing in the way of a comprehensive immigration reform, and would that have solved this problem in the first place?
Well, I think to answer your second question first, I don't think passing the comprehensive immigration reform bill that the Senate passed last year would have helped the situation. I think that there were some enforcement provisions in there, like the border surge, that may have been able to help stem this. But by granting amnesty to up to or even more than 11 million illegal immigrants that are currently living in the United States, that's sending a message that if you come here and you can get here and stay here illegally, eventually we're just going to pass a bill just like we did in 1986 and just like we did in 2013. So I don't know if I don't think that that's the right solution to the problem. As for comprehensive immigration reform's chances, now that this has happened, I don't think it helps it. Because the reason why it didn't get through the House was because House Republicans, especially leaders, what they're hearing is that the American people don't trust that the government is going to enforce our immigration laws. We didn't do it after 1986, and we're still not doing it today. And it's not just the Obama administration. George W. Bush was guilty of doing it as well. So until the American people have that trust that the federal government will enforce our immigration laws, I think it's going to be very difficult to get a bill passed.
Okay, and for our audience who are global and who don't understand Washington politics, let me explain that the Republican Party is the party that's opposed to President Barack Obama's Democratic Party politically, and they say that they do not trust the president to enforce the nation's immigration laws. And this week, President Barack Obama announced that if a comprehensive immigration reform bill is not announced, he will take matters into his own hands. He will announce executive orders to fix the immigration problem. Mr. Khanna, let me ask you, what do you think of this president's "I'm taking charge of this" approach?
I need to add a small opinion on what Chris said, and I think that's very important for us to understand. I'll get to the president's announcement, if I may take a minute. The problem here is not of enforcement. These children show up and we cannot deal with this. The problem is defect in laws. By passing a comprehensive immigration law, we put a policy into place that is cohesive. Right now, our policy does not jive with the way things are. Because we don't have good laws in place, we cannot handle this surge of people showing up at our border in a cohesive manner. And because we don't have the laws, we don't have a policy in place. That's why having immigration reform passed would not help in the sense of just stemming or shoring up our borders. It would help in implementing a policy that is coherent and in accord with the times of today. As far as president's announcements are concerned, look, his hands are tied. He can only go that far. He cannot change the laws. He can selectively choose the laws to the extent that they have been delegated to him in a discretionary manner. So he cannot just randomly choose whatever he wants to implement and what he does not want to implement. Whatever discretion he has is within the statute. He is a creature of the statute when the laws are concerned.
Mr. Shimolinski, what do you think, and we'll come and discuss immigration reform in detail, but what do you think of the president's announcement?
Well, I think a lot of it just has to do with election year politics. It's certainly looking like the Senate may be at risk for the Democratic Party. And President Obama needs to motivate his base so they turn up at the polls in November when the elections roll around to make sure that they can keep the Senate in Democratic hands, in the Democrats' hands. And in order to do that, he needs to appease to a certain portion of his base. And this is what they want. You see a large group of Democrats in both the House and the Senate that are urging him to do this. They want him to do this because they know that it can only help their chances in the fall.
But apparently the Republicans don't want to put this bill on the table this year, and the president has been asking for it for a long time. If there's a problem at the nation's borders that needs to be addressed, whether that's addressed through a bill that the Senate passed or a different bill, why not do it?
Well, I think the big problem is that the Senate-passed bill is a 1,200-page bill. It does a whole lot more than just securing the border. It does a whole lot more than just mandating E-Verify. It doubles legal immigration. It provides legal status for almost every single person who's currently living in the country illegally. And those are some other issues that the Republican base has some issues with.
So why not give their bill with their priorities? And then we can talk about how to rectify it?
I think the concern is, on the Republican side of the aisle, is that you've had statements made by Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Harry Reid in the Senate that have said, as long as the House passes something to do with immigration, we will conference it with a bill that the Senate passed last year, meaning they're going to replace whatever the House passes and replace it with a bill that the Senate passed. And then they're going to force the House's hand to take a vote on it. And they don't want to do that.
So it's politics. We're coming towards the end of the program. So let me get Mr. Khanna's, Khanna to chime in. Mr. Khanna, what do you think Americans are saying giving amnesty to 11 or 12 million illegal people is a message to the rest of the world? Come in here. If not now, 10 years from now, you'll be legally in the U.S.
We are an open society. Unless we become a closed society and close our doors to people, it is very difficult not to have symbolism read into every action we take. The fear that future may be vitiated by something right and proper that we do in the present should not hold us back from doing what is right and proper. And to add to what Chris said, look, if you cannot pass a comprehensive bill, I think the Democrats were okay. They were going to work with even bills passed in smaller installments. And the fear that somehow that would go into conference and come out completely distorted, that still does not pass the bill. Republicans could always bow back from that bill, and Democrats know that. So we could have always passed the bill in smaller installments, in discrete